Well, hello. I hope you're enjoying your day so far. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how we make a website responsive to different devices. Now, we're all of us used to looking at our websites on our smartphone. We're looking at it on our big display on our desktop. We're looking at it on our iPads, our Samsung tablets, whatever we've got. We're even sometimes looking at it on our huge TV screen. So the thing is, how do we make sure that the experience for the user is compatible with the devices that they're using? Now, I've got something here that I want to demonstrate to you first of all. Okay, so let's have a look. I've just gone to the BBC website, a site that to be much admired for its complexity and so forth. Now, if we're at the moment on the news website, and as you can see, it's quite complex. It's got quite a lot of detail in here. But what happens when we want to look at this on our mobile device? Well, actually, I've got Safari on the Mac open, and with that, I can actually use something called the responsive mode. But I do have to make sure that I've got the develop menu on that menu bar, and I get to that by setting it up in the settings. So under preferences, settings, preferences. I never quite understand which word to use there because some devices use different things. So we're talking about preferences, and if you go to your preferences and go to advanced, you can see at the bottom I've got the develop menu ticked on there. So make sure that you've got that. Then go to that develop menu, and then you'll find enter responsive design mode. So what we're doing now is we're looking at that BBC website as it appears on, as you can see, an iPhone 8 Plus. I mean, maybe we can look at it on even a smaller device like an 8 or even a tiny iPhone SE. I mean, obviously these are just examples. There are other devices that we can look at. You can see we can look at different sizes of phones and so forth. But so you've got, this just gives you an idea of what is going on. Now the question is, how is this achieved? So because as you can see, what's actually happened is all of the content is actually moved into a vertical arrangement, and we use our smartphone to scroll through the content. Whereas when we're looking at it on a larger device, so if we go back to our develop menu and turn that off, which is here, exit responsive design mode, you can see everything is arranged horizontally. In other words, making best use of the large monitor. Whereas on our smartphone, we're making best use of what we've got, which is obviously a lot less. And so we see the same content, but we see it in a different way. So we see it by scrolling up and down. I mean, I know that's fairly obvious to you maybe because you've been using your mobile phones to look at websites. But that's basically the broad brush approach to this. We're trying to make something look good on all different devices. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is to go, let's just get rid of that now. I'm now going to use my VS Code to go through some examples of how we can achieve this. So essentially there are two different ways of doing it. We can either do things by using certain elements in CSS. Obviously we have to use HTML as well, HTML and CSS. We use particular elements, and in this case I'm going to use something called Flex, which is effectively a flexible container that will automatically adjust depending on the content or the device that we're using. The other way of doing it is using something called media queries. So I'm going to cover those two things one after the other separately. So let's actually get going then. I've created a folder which I've called website. And that folder has two further folders inside it, one with images and one with CSS. There's nothing, I mean, I have put an image in there, but there's nothing other than that in there at the moment. I'm going to simply drag that folder onto my VS Code icon. The way that when we do that, yes, I do trust the authors of this folder, so I can click that. But when we do it that way, you'll see that what you actually get is the project in your left-hand panel of VS Code. That's actually a sensible way of doing it, rather than trying to create individual files and then find a way of cross-linking them. It also can be very confusing sometimes if you've got a folder here and a folder there, and they're at different levels and there's a different sort of structure. So your structure needs to be simple. We need one folder folder where we are delivering the website, and then we have our CSS inside another folder and our images in another folder. So at the root then of this folder, I'm going to create first of all my index. So I call it index.html. This will be the default file for that particular space. And then I'm going to go into my CSS folder, and in there I'm going to create another folder, sorry, I beg your pardon, another file, and this time it's simply called styles.css. Now the important thing is, I mean, we can call it what we like, but we do have to make sure that we put that extension .css for that file. Similarly, for our HTML document, we need to make sure that it says .html, because otherwise VS Code won't recognize these files as the correct type. This needs to be an HTML. The style document obviously needs to be a CSS file. So now I've got those two documents open. I can begin the process by first of all working on our HTML, and because we're using VS Code, we have this it's a default setting in VS Code. We've got something called Emmet. Emmet is like a built-in extension to VS Code, which actually provides us with all sorts of shortcuts to make things happen for our HTML. So we don't actually have to write the markup, you know, right the way. We don't have to write opening tags and closing tags and things like that. Further, there are lots of other things that we can do with it. For example, we've got the ability to start off with what we call a boilerplate setting, or if you like a template for our website. And all we have to do is to hit the exclamation mark, like so, and then tab. Like that. So what it will do is it will, just got to get rid of that. What it will actually do then is to create this this file, this text, and as you can see, it's just the bare bones of a website. Now we just need to make a couple of changes here. I'm going to title this my demo for responsive. Like that. I'm also going to now go to my styles. I'm going to link to my styles sheet, which I want to make sure that I'm linked to straight away, so I can put that inside the head tag. And again, another shortcut that we've got is link, and then hit the tab key, and then you'll see that it's actually just asking me to put something in the reference to it. Now, making H references or making hypertext references to other files, you can of course type this in, and what it would be is css/styles.css. Now if you get confused about the pathways to different things, what you can do is to right click over the item and copy the relative path and then paste that into there. So I'm pasting it in. So as you can see, it's now linked to that style sheet. So this is the way that we're working. We've got an HTML document linked to a CSS style sheet, which we haven't, of course, put anything in yet. So let's first of all start off by building the content in our HTML document. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to build we want first of all a container that will actually be our sort of, if you like, our top level container within the body. And again, by default, or it's not by default, but it's sort of the common way of working with HTML is to have an item or an element called the main element. And so I'm going to use that to start with. So here's my main box then. Now what I'm going to do, just for the purposes of this demonstration, is I'm going to have two elements inside that. These will be the items which we want to rearrange depending on the size of the device that we're using. So first of all, I'm going to have an image, and I'm going to put that image inside a figure, like so. So in that figure will be my image, and then I'm also going to have below that I'm going to have a section with my text in it. And I'm going to give it a class name, actually. I'm going to call it info, like that. And then inside there, I'm going to then have, well, I can have any number of items really, but just to begin with, I'm just going to have a single paragraph. Let's say we just have a paragraph like that. And then in there, we're just going to have some text. Let's actually just use a bit of lorem ipsum text like that. Now it looks a bit of a mess at the moment, but if I save it, it does reorganize itself a little bit better. Let's actually just spread that out a little bit so we can see what's going on. So in our figure now, inside the figure we need an image. So I'm going to put in here an image. So img is for the image tag. Again, press the tab key, and then you'll get your ability. You know, it's asking us now to put something in between these quotation marks. So the first thing is the path to the image. Now I've already put an image in. I put an image inside my folder, which is my cover, my Shakespeare cover actually. And again, if I right click over that, I can copy the relative path to that, and then I can paste that into there. That's actually quite useful, as I said, because it just helps you make sure that you know, rather than typing it in, you can make sure that you've got the right one. Now, before I carry on with this, it's just one or two things just to point out. Make sure, well, my suggestion to you is always use lowercase letters for names of files, names of folders. Make sure that you only use lowercase letters. If you use a mixture of uppercase and lowercase letters, because I know we're all in the habit of hitting you know, the caps character to start off a word or something. If you do that, it can get a bit confusing, because if the link here is to capital I images, whereas over here the folder is called lowercase I, then it will not forgive you, and it will not work. It may work locally, because again, this is the confusing thing, is on your own computer, your computer might be set up to be agnostic when it comes to upper and lower case. When it's on the server, however, it will not accept those two. It will presume those two things are different things. So something spelt with a capital letter and something spelt with an lowercase letter, those will be different things when it gets onto the server. So you might be kind of setting yourself for problems. Okay, the alt tag, of course, is the alternative text, which we need to put in for accessibility. So I'm going to put in here a picture of Titania and bottom, and that text can be as long as you like. The longer the better in some ways. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Now there's nothing really much going to be, this is not going to look like very much, but I will now just open this up in our web server and sorry, in our web browser. And the way that we do that is to use this live server. So I'm going to click go live. That's at the bottom right there, and that will start my browser. And I'm just going to bring this over here to make it to the right of our work here. Let's actually just arrange these things side by side. Now, as you can see, my cover is absolutely enormous, but I do at least have the basics of it here. I've got my text underneath, and I've got my image. So now what I'm going to do first of all is just to put in some basic style to make it at least visible to us, so that we can see what's going on. So let's go into the styles CSS now. Now the first thing is I'm going to just do some generic things. The first thing I'm going to do is, this is actually what we call our universal selector. That's the, I don't know why it keeps putting it in there, because I'm not in there. Okay, I'm just not in the proper place. Okay, so I'm going to put in my asterisk here, which is a universal selector. That just means everything. So it's like a wildcard, if you like, saying everything. And then I'm putting in my curly brackets, and then in here I want to just say the box sizing is going to be border box. What that does is it just clarifies the relationship between what is outside the margin, outside the border of an object and inside the border of an object. So don't worry too much about that, but that does help us later on to make things work a lot better. Now the other thing is that everything by default has a margin on it. Now you can actually see, in fact, if I scroll over here, you can see that when we're looking at these paragraphs of text, we've actually got a margin between them. Let me just go back to down here, and as you can see, they are separated by a margin. There is a space between them. But what I'm going to do is to reset the margins on everything within this universal selector. So I'm going to put in here margin 0. Okay, so that will now put everything right to the edge. So even the body does not have a margin on it anymore, and nor do the paragraphs. Okay, now let's actually just do one other thing, sort of simple thing, just to give us a different font family. So I'm going to put in here I'm going to use my Verdana as my font. That's fine. And now let's actually look at these two items that we've got inside these items. We've got two items. We've got a figure and we've got a section. Now, for both of these items, I'm going to produce some kind of, some sort of width for them, so that they actually will accommodate our content. So let's say for the figure, first of all. So for our figure, I'm going to give this a width of, say, I don't know, say 400 pixels or something like that, just to get us started. And then inside that figure, we've got an image, and that image, I'm going to make that image have a width of 100%, because then that means that it's going to fill the figure, which now I've given a width of 400 pixels. Right, so that's done that. Now what I'm going to do is to give these, just to sort of make sure that it's easier for you to see what's actually going on, and we're going to actually look at the section. So we've got a section, well actually I've given it a class, haven't I? I've given it a class of info. So that info box is where our text is, and I'm simply going to give that a background color of something a little bit darker, say this color here, and I'm going to put the text in here as white. So my text in here is going to be white, so just put color white. Okay, so we've got that now, and then also the other thing is that we probably do want to add some margin for our paragraphs. So let's actually put a margin at the bottom. Or actually, it might be better to put it at the top, although it's not that significant. Let's actually give that a 2em. So that's actually double the. It's like two lines, if you like, of text. And also, I think that maybe it would be a good idea to give some kind of padding around inside this object here, so that we actually don't have it right up against the edge. So again, I'm going to use 2em for that. That's far too much, actually. Let's actually just get that back to 1. Okay, so that's fine for the moment. Now, as you can see, by default, because this is just one thing after the other in the arrangement of the HTML. What we want to do, though, is we want to be able to control the arrangement of these two objects. Let me first of all, let me just do something slightly different here, because this is annoying me. It's rather too much. Okay, that's better. Okay, so what we need to do now then, and I'm going to do it after the body, although it's not very significant where we do it. We now want to address main. So what we're going to do with main is we're going to also give this a background color, so that you can actually see where it is. Just it makes it a bit easier to see. We don't necessarily want it ultimately. Okay, so you can see that that's where we've got that now. And so what I'm going to do with my main is I'm going to now turn this into a flex object. So in other words, it's a container that will make the contents be flexible. And as soon as I do this, as you'll see, so display flex, that turns it into a flex object. And as soon as I save that, you'll see that what actually happens is it puts these two things side by side. So we've got two items, one to the left and one to the right. And that's because the default direction inside a flex object is as a row. So we don't need to actually tell it that we want it into a row, but if I do actually put in here flex direction and I change it to column, you'll see that it goes back to the other arrangement where we've got things sitting side by on top of one another. The default, however, is row, which, as I say, I don't really need to put that in, but just for the sake of completeness, we'll just leave it in there. Now the other thing is that we can also arrange these things. We'll give them a certain width. But the way that we do this is to tell each item what is our preferred width for those objects. So we'll start off with our figure, and as you can see at the moment, the figure is actually set to 400 pixels. If I just take that out, just actually comment that out for the moment, then you see that that it actually goes back to, it sort of tends to give them a bit more equal space, because we're not saying specifically what we want that width to be. And as you can see, we've got that space, and it actually will give us an arrangement of text right away, as you see, like this. But of course, what we're trying to achieve, going back to what we looked at with the BBC website, is we're trying to achieve something where when we get down to a certain size, it then rearranges the content to make sure that it's viewable in a more sensible way for these different devices. So the way that we need to do this then is to change the preferred if you like, what you might say is the basic sort of width that we want these things to be, what we would prefer them to be, and then give it a chance to adjust if it needs to be. So what we'll do is, for our info box, we'll actually give this a flex basis, and we'll give this a flex basis of, say, 300 pixels. Okay, so now what's happening is that is obviously much reduced, because what's actually happening is the image is now taking over. But if we now do the same for the figure, I'll just use exactly the same. Then we're getting basically the same for each, object. Now, as you can see, this is just sitting to the left, because everything is by default left aligned, sitting to the left of within our main box. But if we now make sure that those are sitting in the center, the two different ways of doing it. We could take the whole main box and obviously reduce the width of that and put that into the center of the body. But another way of doing it is in our main box, we can actually talk about the justify of how we justify this content, and we can make this go into the center like that. Okay, we can also, another thing that we can do is we can make it go into the center, but we can also make it go so that we actually distribute it around this, inside that box. So justify the content, and we can actually then say which way round, or do we want space around it or space between? Let's actually just go space between. Make sure I put my inverted commas in there. Sorry, my semicolon. Okay, and now what we have is space between. So we're saying 300 pixels is our preferred basic width, but we're giving space between. We can also say space around. That's another way of working on this. So space around will then provide space either side as well. Now the thing is that if we haven't got the space to fit that in, then it should then change, but it won't unless we do something else, and that is we've got to be able to tell it that once we run out of space, we want to then wrap this content. So in other words, although we've got the flex direction row at the moment, by saying let me wrap please, it will then change it to a column. So the way that we do this is to say flex wrap. Now this won't necessarily do anything too dramatic, but as you can see, when we get down to a certain size, then it actually wraps, or it puts one thing on top of the other. Now, the other thing that we can do for each of the individual items, and all we're really dealing with is the figure, because the figure and the info box, that is the section called info, those two items are the direct children of main. So that's how Flex works. It only really applies to the direct children inside that Flex item, Flex box. And so I'll just move this. I'll move this down just so that you know this is actually just makes it a little bit clearer to you. So in other words, these two items here are the children of main, and so those are the things that are affected by this. However, the other thing that we can do is we can say for these different items inside, these different children within the main box, we can say, are we prepared to allow them to shrink or to grow, depending on the amount of space that we've got. And so the way that we do this is to say flex grow. And then if we, by default, this is 0, so at the moment it's not growing. But if I say 1, then what will happen is that will be allowed to grow. As you can see, it will grow to fill in the space. If I do the same, of course, for my figure, then they're kind of in a way competing for the same space. And so we basically just get back to how we were before. Although, of course, we don't have the space between anymore, because it's just they're both grown. They've both grown to whatever is required. And when we go down to the smaller size, then yes, it will go up and down. It will go into a column, but they're both growing accordingly. Now, if we say with our figure that we don't want that to grow, and we put 0, so it's like a switch. 0 is not, 1 is on. Then we get that arrangement, so that you'll see that we do still get the columns, but the text is growing, or the text box, the info box, is growing to whatever we've got available to it. So that's how that's working. Now I should just explain that these numbers, 1 or 0, if you can actually have other numbers, so we could say 2 or 3 or whatever, then you're basically going to get it'll be a proportional change. I don't really have a way of demonstrating that, but if we had more than one object or more than 2 objects, then in the main box, then it would actually have an effect. So what we're basically saying is, make sure that the text grows, but the image doesn't. And we can do it like that. Now what we would have to do really now is to restrict the main box, to make the main box actually just have a limited width. So if I go to width and actually give this a width of, say, 70%, then you can see it's all sitting over to the left. But if we at the same time, in order to center it, we do actually use our margin auto. So I'm going to use margin. I'm going to say margin at the top and the bottom is actually nothing, but I'm going to put in my auto for left and right. So that will now put that into the center like that. And so we're sort of making this. We're making this, I hope that makes sense now, that we're basically just giving that a different arrangement. Now, obviously, there's quite a few other things that we can do. We might, want to, for example, go back here and say, let's just, for the moment, for the purposes of this, we'll actually not let the text grow at all. So we'll actually put that back to 0, so that we've got these things arranged in this way. Okay, so there are our two items side by side. Okay, and so really that's the basic way that we're working with this. So we do obviously want to change the way this is viewing at the moment, but I don't think it's a particularly good idea to to spread these things out so much, but it might be better just to go back to justify content and actually just put that in the center. There we are. So that's just in the center of that box, which of course we don't necessarily need. We don't necessarily need that to have a grey background there, but it just does show you how we are limiting the width of that object. Okay, now there's quite a lot of other things that we can do, but obviously for the purposes of this is just a demonstration of these two main areas that we want to use to make something responsive. Now, the next way that I want to talk to you about is using media queries. Now, the way that we use media queries is that we have to, in a way, interrogate the browser. We're sort of asking the browser, what is the size of the window, or what is the size of the viewport that we're viewing this on? And once we know that, then we can actually make adjustments to the CSS. So the way that it works is that we simply have a media query that determines the width of our display and then applies some CSS as long as it's either above or below that. And so the way that it works, I'm going to the bottom of my CSS now, and I'm going to put in a simple media query just to demonstrate this. So let's actually go to the media query, and we do that by going to @media, and then we say screen, and then we're basically saying, and we want to say what actually is our the size of our. Sorry, I'm getting a bit confused myself here. Right, so what is the size of our window? And we're actually just then putting that in brackets. So we're looking for a maximum width, and I will probably do something sort of exaggerated here to make it obvious. Now let's actually go to 600, because that's obviously, that's probably too large generally, but at least it allows us to demonstrate it quite easily. So in other words, when we get down to a width of 600 pixels or below, then do something different for our CSS. And the way that we normally do this is to change something in here. So let's just do something very simple, just so that we can demonstrate it. You can see here that we've got info. That's our info box, and the background color to that currently is blue. I'm just going to change it to orange. Now just notice how this is all working. After the media query, we've got a curly bracket and then a closing curly brackets at the end, but contained within that is another rule with, again, curly brackets. So just understand that you've got two pairs of curly brackets here. So we are now changing it to orange when it gets below that size. Let's see if that works. Okay. So when we got down to there, so we know what's happening here. When we get down to that size, then the background is changing to orange. Now that's not necessarily something that I want to do, but what we'll do is we'll say, well, actually, when we get down to a certain size, we've already made it so that our mobile device will actually deliver the content in a different arrangement, putting the content in a column rather than a row. But what we really want to do is to change the type, the size of the type in here. So I'm going to actually put in font size. Let's go for 0.9 EM. Okay, so as you can see, it goes down to that size. Let's actually just make it a little bit more dramatic so that we can actually get the demonstration to work a little bit better. Okay, so there you are. It changes the size of that. And the other thing is that what you might want to do is to actually say, well, we don't want the space around the objects. We don't want all of the space left and right. And once we get down to a smaller, narrower width device, what we want to do is to no longer have a 70% width for our main box. So what we can do then in here is to say, well, okay, for our main, let's actually make the width of that to be 100%. Okay, like so. Now, because our web browser won't allow us to go down below that, I think it's stopping at that point. What I need to do is to go into the responsive mode under the develop menu to check this out. So going to enter responsive design mode. And now you can see if I now use a smaller device, then we're sort of getting how we want it to be for our for looking at it on a mobile device. So I'm going to go down to the smallest, and as you can see, we can scroll through this. And that's essentially what we've done now. So we've achieved that. We've got quite a few little details to resolve, and we might want to reorganize our content. We want a title and all of this. But essentially, we've got our main box, and in our main box, we've got these two items, and we're just essentially delivering it in two different ways. On a wider screen, we get this. Forget about the grey box, so I can actually get rid of that. It doesn't need to be there. And then we move down to a smaller size. We can use media queries to then add extra features. So the Flexbox allows us to rearrange things when we get smaller, because we're giving it the ability to grow or shrink depending on what we put in here, and then we're also having media queries when we get down to a certain size. Now, obviously, the way that I've done this, I should just explain, is I'm working on the basis that I'm delivering it for large screens first, and that's why I've got max width. So my sort of media queries are then switching over to a small device. It is possible to work the other way round. You can start with mobile first and arrange it for mobile first, and then you can use a min width, which will then say, well, when we get above a certain size, then make the changes. So it's sort of like the reverse of what I've done. But this is generally what I tend to do, because I'm working on a large screen. I'm seeing what it's going to look like on a large screen first, and then I make the changes in the media query to see what it's going to be like on a mobile device. So I hope that's helped, and there are lots of tutorials online about the Flexbox method for actually making a responsive website, and you'll also find lots of tutorials on how to use media queries as well.